very kind introduction, and great to see everyone here. It's been 3 years, and it's great to be back after 3 years at Cypher. It's probably one of my favorite conferences, which I love to travel all the way here all the time. So for those who probably are in the audience, I think there's a one round of congratulations, because probably most of you by the last Cypher and this Cypher are probably managing teams 2x the size that you were managing last time. Most of you probably have doubled your compensation in that time frame period. That's where the market has been very kind to us. Those who have been hiring talent, sorry for that, because you probably have already given away your first bonds to the right candidates. And it's been a very interesting journey. If you really think about last 3 years, if you think about digital transformation wave that just took off, Satya Nadella had this great talk about this great quote that pandemic or COVID has done more for digital transformations than anything else. And he's right. But I think something else is happening. So as the digital transformations were going on, all of us who were very important, but in our organization's eyes, fairly expensive, we became very important, very urgent, and very expensive. And that drove a lot of things in terms of the demand, in terms of the crazy hiring, in terms of the relevance. I mean, the Cypher is much bigger. You can see the number of sponsors compared to like 3 years ago to today. You can see the talent. It's a completely different landscape in literally a matter of 3 years. From our vantage point, as in the introduction, there are probably 14,000 data engineers, data scientists, analytics operations folks, analytics engineers, and all kind of the various skill sets that you can think about. We are working with around 300 or so companies around the world. And that gives us a very unique perspective as to what actually is happening. And I want to propose is essentially this discussion around framing that problem a little bit slightly differently around what actually is happening. 3 years ago, we were talking a lot about defining AI. Okay, is it assisted decision making? Is it augmented decision making? Is it autonomous? We were talking a lot about the role in digital transformations of AI, and I think we're kind of past that. Right? We are past that, and more we are seeing AI and advanced analytics at the center of these digital transformations. And you could argue even the word digital transformation is the right framing or not. So essentially, the next 42 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is kind of frame a little bit different perspective, which I call the age of algorithms, which is how do you democratize any of the transformation? It fundamentally comes down to the algorithms at the center of it. And if we frame these problems differently, the management consultant in me kind of talks about it, you start thinking about the problems in a slightly different way, and you approach problems in a different way. And what I'm going to attempt is kind of provide a framework, and that will probably tie a lot of the sessions that we are going to have over the next 3 days in different ways, and it can probably provide a holistic viewpoint of that. So let's start with trading floors. If you really think about trading floors from 1920s to 1980s, they kind of looked like this, probably busier than what this picture has. A lot of people, a lot of shouting, and something happened. And actually not something, a bunch of things happened. Somewhere from, I would say, 1980s to 2000s, you could see there were some technology advancements that were made, which is the time of trading essentially changed by multiple factors, and that it keeps on decreasing from 20 seconds to 10 milliseconds to right now 100 nanoseconds. And that obviously was driven by a lot of the technology that was powering it, but also a lot of regulations. I mean, there was this cross-market trading that happened. There was a whole notion of decentralization, SEC authorizing electronic exchanges. And essentially, what you started seeing was basically algorithmic traders, algorithms doing most of the trade. And this stops at 2012, but from 10% of the trades, of the entire equity trades that have been made by algorithms in like 2000, to literally in a matter of 10 years, 10 to 12 years, that became 50%. So you could argue at that point, algorithms are running our financial markets, and that had a lot of benefits. It had a lot of benefits in terms of increased liquidity. It had benefits in terms of a lot more transaction costs going down. We barely pay any charges for any of the trades that we make. But essentially, the entire function became algorithmic. So much so that coming out of the pandemic, like one of Asia's oldest trading floors in Philippines, they shut down. They shut down the physical floor, and it's actually an entirely virtual trading exchange right now. And why are we talking about this? We're talking about this is because something fundamental like that is happening, I think, all across, in every function that we are dealing with when we are looking at these enterprises, when we look at these digital transformations. At the root of it, if you go back to any of your projects, any of the work that you're doing, you would find, I think, 2 or 3 things that are happening. Number one, data and AI becoming at the center of it, and more decisions being done by algorithms within that process. And when there's a threshold of 50% of decisions either influenced by algorithms in some sort, essentially at that point in time, it's an algorithmic enterprise, or it's an algorithmic function. And if you think about it from that perspective, a lot of the other things have to change accordingly. So let's talk about where else it's happening. And you might identify some of them. Some of the work is basically what we have done, but we have seen others, some of the folks that you are in the room, who have done some very interesting work in this space. So the future is actually already here. The same trading floor example is actually in multiple places right now. Whether you talk about supply chain in engineering, manufacturer, predictive maintenance, right? I mean, we have seen some fantastic work that this engine manufacturer did, where every second a plane lands and generates literally more than a terabyte of data, and that entire data stream is evaluated for all the signals, because all these parts have all these sensors and they are producing signals, and it is fundamentally evaluated for failure patterns. And it's not only one component at a time, there are a combination of components. So this bunch of hundreds of algorithms are trying to essentially find out what is out of ordinary. And that is essentially ML algorithms of some sort, and then they prompt the experts to go and either suggest a predictive maintenance action or intervention or not. And then obviously the human in the loop kind of makes the final decision. And that itself has saved this company $250 million and more, and counting. And then there's a whole supply chain element to it, which is how do you manage the parts around it? How do you make sure the parts go to the right place where the plane is going, and you are able to service them in the right way? Huge efficiency play, but essentially run by algorithms. Or you go to fintechs, right? Number of fintechs that have grown up, and so much electronic money movement that is happening on some of these platforms. A lot of the companies are banks right now, in some sort, or financial institutions. But there's a whole compliance. There's a lot of nefarious activities that happen because of that, because of a little bit lack of looser controls, I would say. There are some controls. And one of the big issues is, how do you onboard someone, understanding that that person is the right person or not, or the company is the right company or not, and how do you actually, during a transaction, figure out that is a legitimate transaction and it's not for any nefarious activities. There are obviously regulations around it around the world, for different countries have different ones. And what you see is, again, algorithms come into play, because the number of people you want to onboard, what are the patterns you want to look for the bad actors. There are some rules, obviously, but then there are other patterns that you can see. Same thing on transactions. Every time you kind of start a transaction on any of these platforms, there's a lot of algorithms which are trying to determine whether some of it is potentially nefarious, and if it is nefarious, then what to do with it, which is the right type of skill set they should look at it, because you are sending transactions for different kinds of things. Again, so for fintechs, thinking about their entire money laundering exercise is fundamentally an algorithmic-driven process. To what we did, right? 3 years ago, we had a lot of HR managers who would pick up the phone or walk to the desk of the employee have a quick chat, understand how they are feeling, and that leads to some sort of a employee engagement, and they could make a judgment call around it, and they could make interventions. That's exactly what we did 3 years ago. Or there are some companies where you would do one global annual survey, some sort of a pulse survey that you would kind of get. So you would get one data point a year about what's the state of the union about the engagement of employees. We turned it upside down, where we essentially put together a chatbot, which started with a rules engine and became smarter over the time. And that started interacting with all our employees, which are essentially right now spread all over the world. And in a very defined pattern, started reaching out. And guess what? A lot of people started talking to these chatbots. And these chatbots, and then as you determine patterns, you could very quickly understand who's more engaged, who's less engaged, what kind of interventions, and immediately alerts go out to the HR manager, to their own manager. So the whole employee engagement process, which was fundamentally a manual process for us, became an algorithmic process. And I'm sure all of these, a lot of the companies have done similar things, especially over the pandemic. Or if you start thinking about supply chains, logistics, this is a company that provides cold storage or cold chain storage, supply chain. Essentially, think about vaccines moving around the world. And when vaccines are moving around the world under temperature control that you would need, and these are very constrained supply chains. I mean, supply chain itself is a challenge, but think about during that time. The demand are unpredictable, they are showing up in different countries and different ports at different places. The supply is fairly constrained, but the challenge is you still need to fill the container. You still need to fill the container and drive the utilization of the container. So the demands are appearing randomly. There are some predetermined demands. The supply is a fixed one, but you want to maximize. You have to meet the service level agreements. Think about how do you actually run the entire logistics network for this company. And fundamentally, it's a bunch of algorithms. I mean, there are humans in the loop in all of these processes, but essentially a bunch of algorithms that are trying to figure out the best and most efficient paths, the best and most efficient which order to pick up at what point in time, and you drive up utilization, and obviously you drive down cost reduction and obviously increase revenue. And all of these examples have a bunch of things that is common, right? Which is fundamentally, yeah, you can say these are all digital transformation examples, but it's a little bit more than that. It's putting algorithms at the center of the process and redefining the process completely. And when you do that, a lot of things change. Like, what is the role of the humans in that process? How do you actually even think about that process? What is a push process versus a pull process? Like, because the alerts go out versus you intervening around it. The technology that kind of runs it, and potentially barriers that you can have, because when you leave something on algorithms, bad things potentially can happen. But all of these things are happening, but at the same time, there's another way to look at it. These are a bunch of anecdotes I shared with you around things that we have seen, we have done, others have done, that we have noticed out there. But what else is happening? You go and take a look at the proxy is look at the software spend, the tooling for such algorithmic efforts. And that tooling market essentially has grown 5x over the last 4 years. And it is going to grow another 4-5x. It's predicted to grow in the next 3-4 years. So that just tells you that it's not only in isolated things that are happening, it's something broader is happening, because if the tool sets are being adopted that widely, and you can see in the sponsors today, the tool sets are adopting that widely, things will change. But we all know, we work with our clients, we work in our own companies, the future is indeed here. It is the algorithmic future is here, but it's not really evenly distributed. And what I mean by that is all these examples that I gave you are exceptions. They are definitely not the rule. Probably less than 10% of our processes within our companies, within functions, follow anything remotely similar to that. Most of it is still antiquated, fairly manual, a lot of challenges. I mean, there are some very good challenges. And that's, I think, the challenge in front of us. As we think about digital transformations over next 3, 5 years, how do we start thinking about them? And how do we make sure, what is the playbook that we can take, and what are the capabilities we need to drive so that these things become the norm, and we actually distribute the future a little bit more evenly for all kinds of reasons, apart from the profit motives most enterprises have. So to do that, and this is where kind of the framing kind of starts coming into play, when we look at all of these things and we looked at patterns of what actually is happening of the companies that are trying to do it, how effective they have been, and what are we learning? Essentially what we are learning is, so roughly these 8, 9 things that we want to talk about, and we kind of club them into 3 broad buckets, which is how you drive AI at the core of a process, of a core of a function, or of a core of an enterprise. You fundamentally have to think about 3 broad steps. You have to think about explore. You have to think about, after the exploration, how do you do expansion of it, and how do you embed it? Fairly simple, straightforward 3 E's. But within that, there are learnings. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the learnings that we have seen around that, and some of the pitfalls. The first one is thinking about pilots, thinking about and a culture of experimentation in an organization. I'll give you one example. This is a pretty interesting work that we have seen being done. We haven't done this, which is PepsiCo, and how they used a pilot project, a machine learning pilot project on Cheetos, and on the manufacturing of Cheetos. And what's really interesting is, you would say it's like a very weird problem and a hard problem to start choosing, or not choose something else. But if you really think about it from a Cheetos perspective, producing consistent, high-quality product, that's kind of the #1 strategic imperative. If you're not able to do that, you could price it very effectively, or you could do a very clever promotions. Doesn't really matter if the product is not the right one. And so they fundamentally, as they thought about the whole product chain, or the use case chain, they actually identified problems that really mattered. And I think that's kind of the first learning, is how identifying high-value pilots that you can make something out of. And the problem set is actually super interesting. If you really think about how a Cheetos gets made, there's essentially corn that comes in, and then there is like all kinds of ingredients, but cornmeal is the main one. It gets into a machine, and you kind of put it like temperature, and like think about moisture, temperature, heat, cooling, and the entire cycle that goes in, and it's a machine called extruder, and then outcome on the other side with all these parameters that you will change over a period of time. On the other side, there is a Cheetos. But there's one big problem, is the cornmeal is not very standardized. It comes in, the consistency changes. You need basically an output consistency that is exactly the way you want it. The input consistency is actually a variable. It's a set of variable thing, because for all kinds of reasons. And what actually happened was they created a digital twin, right? Because part of the thing is around, earlier operators used to be at the machine, and they used to be at the machine and used to try to change the parameters by essentially testing by trial and error, so that you go and get the right batch. And it brings down the machine efficiency, increases wastage. But on the other hand, if you can take all the data of how the machines have worked, put it on some sort of a simulator or digital twin, and work through the various parameters of input variable changes and expert changes and all the things you did in the middle, and you can run that simulation. And this thing runs every day, like millions of simulations, so that you can go and figure out what is the right, based on these inputs, what you're going to do from an output perspective, and what are the parameters you're going to change. And this is a pilot project. I don't know whether it's in production or not, but they started they proved the pilot project very effectively around the needle on some of the quality benchmarks, and driving down latency and wastage. Other example, which is fascinating, and I'm going after examples which I found fascinating, not because they were regular examples, but they are going to heart of the business. This was a great one. This is another consumer products goods company. They were thinking about making dishwasher. right? I mean, if you think about making dishwasher, you have to kind of, it's about the product development. And in CPG, obviously, all of us know, creating new products in time and launching them and driving in a consistency and driving down the cost is very important. And right now, in a recessionary environment, probably even more important. How do you manage the price? Essentially, the way they thought about this problem is, I have 15 ingredients, and I need to bring the unit cost down of that ingredients and get to the same. How much foam does it create? For instance, I want to increase the number of foam by basically, so which chemical should I replace from my current formulary of the dishwasher to the new dishwasher? If I change that, what will it do? So essentially, it's like a drug discovery process, but on dishwashers. And they started playing with a lot of these chemicals. And again, it's a explainable AI model because all these chemicals have different properties, and these properties go and impact, okay, this will give you more foam, less foam, again, a digital twin kind of an example. Or, by the way, if it changes, if you get more foam, but the color changes from blue to yellow, okay, that's not right, we wanted a blue color. So what other ingredients has to change so that I can make it more foam, blue color? Those are the kind of experiments they were running in a simulated environment that they could potentially take to the lab, the physical lab, and cycle through the new product development cycle much faster. Again, core of the business. This is digital transformation at how you actually are creating new products, and AI at the center of it. And there are many such examples. But the core point is, how do you are taking up very hard problems, and second, not only are comfortable taking hard problems, you're okay failing and testing. By design, you have designed it that this experiment will fail a bunch of times, and you will kind of do that. So that's kind of the whole thing around thinking about piloting such efforts in an appropriate way. The second piece of it, which if you go back, is around expansion. And expansion is really interesting. And I think that some of our biggest learnings is probably at that stage that most of the enterprises are on. One is timeline expectations. Far too frequently, as a community, I think we oversell and underdeliver. And there are reasons for that. There are reasons for that because I said it is important and expensive, and we became very important, urgent, and very expensive. So yeah, there's a reason to manage that, and it's hard to manage that. And the second piece of it is talent. How do you actually think about managing talent? I mean, we all know what kind of talent market we are in right now, but kind of consistently build a talent pool. And a talent pool that is not only like, okay, it's not like, earlier I think most organizations have gone through it, okay, let's hire like 2 data scientists and they'll solve my problems. Very soon we are realizing it's a team of skill sets, it's a different kind of skill set that work together, it's different, that needs to come, and you have to kind of foster it over a period of time and do the investment, and that is what magic starts happening. And it doesn't happen overnight, it takes time. The value proposition has to be there. Most of the talent have a lot of options to go to different places. So who's committed and do that? And we see that all the time here. And third is platform. If anything, literally 3 years ago, the tech stack, and the 3 years now, like from last Cypher to this Cypher, I think we are working on a completely new tech stack in analytics. The whole modern data, the modern data stack that has evolved, literally in over the last 2-3 years, in a very dramatic manner. Snowflake IPO, you have Databricks, you have kind of Data IQ, you have Fivetran. All these things are kind of a lot more popular right now, and they were probably open source projects a few years ago. And that notion around how to think about a platform that consistently is able to speed up all your activities is there. And these 3 things, doing it together, not only have to do it, you have to manage expectations, you have to get the talent portion right, and you have to get the tech and the platform portion right consistently to go and drive the value, and over a period of time, you have to do it. And I think the best example of that is probably Netflix. How many of you were around or were coding, or how many of you actually took part in the Netflix, the competition that they did, the $1 million competition to change the recommendation engine? Or how many were aware of it in 2006? They did it in 2006. Yeah, so there's a lot of newer talent clearly in the room. So in 2006, so it's a refresher, and when old folks like me were still around and were doing things, Netflix came up in 2006 with a very radical idea that they are going to do crowdsourcing, and this is pre-Kaggle, okay? By the way, the Kaggle has also gone away. This is pre-Kaggle, where they said they're going to give $1 million to someone who can beat their basically the recommendation engine that they have, that put together. And that was like a big deal. 2006, $1 million, a global competition. I don't know, I mean, this ran for a year. I mean, this was, if you're an analytics, data science, AI professional then, this is all you talked about. There were competitions. I mean, you would go and apply there, and it was really fun. It was really something. And I think it's an inflection point to a lot of the things that actually is this industry today, is that particular competition. And someone won. I think they used a support vector machine kind of an approach, and they won the $1 million. And this was 2006. And I think since then, I don't know if someone works in Netflix, at least what I've heard is they never even put that model in production. They could not put that model in production for various reasons. But think about it, from 2006, they kind of continued at it. And last year, they talked about that most of the ML algorithms and ML systems that developed over 15 years, that has saved them $1 billion. And obviously, it's much more than the recommended systems around that, but that's was kind of the starting point. Think about a 15-year investment. Literally billions of dollars, and they have created things around, they have created, there were no platforms. They have created this Metaflow thing, and they open sourced it. Others are using it. So they essentially went back to and created their own technology. Forget about the platforms itself. And how many companies and how many leaders would be able to go and talk to their boards about a journey like that? 15 years, literally, so like the spend and kind of the talent pool that they have to attract, the spend on that at over a period of time, and that product will improve and will give all these benefits. And that, I think, is something, and by the way, I'm sure the tech stack has changed 3 times in that journey, which they have probably kind of replaced and gotten new and the next version of it and so on. And I think that's probably the most sobering piece. If there's one thing you want to take away, is I think our biggest risk is, again, I think, as overpromising and under-delivering. And some of the reality is this thing is hard. And when this is hard, you need to stick to it till a period of time, and you need to get a bunch of these ingredients right. That's only from those pilots you can actually expand and make things real. There are many great companies, I mean, that have kind of shown that commitment, but they have stuck to it. And most of them you probably hear about them in kind of developer communities, open source communities, but they are chugging away as they go along. This is not a silver bullet. And I think none of these AI transformations are going to show and say, okay, next month, next quarter, we want to kind of show things. You can show a lot of pilots, which is essentially what is happening. You go to any of the investor calls, and you see a lot of mention of AI. Actually, there was a really interesting study that Accenture did, where they found that the companies who mention AI on their investor calls, the CEOs mention AI on the investor calls, have 2x kind of the performance of the companies that do not. I mean, that sounds fascinating, but obviously the reverse is not true. It's like there's a correlation and causation problem. But that's kind of the challenge you have to kind of you have to take, and there's a cultural change that you have to go and focus on. Finally, I think, which is, if I go back to the same framework here, embed. And this is really interesting, and I'll kind of talk to you about a little bit of a survey we did around 200 executives that we looked at around the world. And we asked them, what is the biggest challenge that you have for driving kind of data projects or analytics projects? And change management actually came down to one of the top things. It was definitely one of the top 2, I think, that it came out to be. And that tells something, which is more companies are thinking about, not only, if you think about that expansion piece of it, it's about what an analytics team at the center, or so however it is organized, can do. Embedding is about the externalities. It's about what the other organizations are ready to do. And if people are thinking about change, means they are thinking about going from, okay, I've expanded it, how do I really embed it into the core of the business, into my core of the process, everyone is comfortable with it. And that is kind of probably where I think we are in the very beginning stages of as an industry to creating good playbooks around it. So I'll give you a couple of examples around thinking about change. So one of our clients, they are a large health system in the US, and they have had an analytics COE for some time. They have kind of invested in the kind of the expand bucket that I talked about. They have invested in platforms. They have invested in a talent pool for a few years now. They are producing a lot of pretty interesting analysis, very practical analysis. And I think what I love with them is they tie all their use cases to their mission statement. I've never seen actually a company that takes the mission statement and starts tying the use cases to the mission statement. And they do it in a very structured manner. And they've seen some benefits around it. However, you're dealing with nurses, physicians, you're dealing with experts in their own field, and they feel that they have to push a lot. There's not a whole lot of pull. So how do you drive change? One of the things we did in that entire effort around the change management is we said, okay, how do you make change management not a touchy-feely activity, but something that you can actually measure? So we kind of came up with this concept of change lens. And what change lens essentially is kind of, it takes probably the best of surveying techniques and combines them with understanding the overall kind of a flow of decision-making in an organization. And that flow of decision-making in an organization, and you put a digital tool around it. And so that what actually happens is kind of a similar idea than the AMBER, the employee engagement kind of an idea, but for an external facing audience and measuring change or measuring the various activities of change, like whether there is the right executive support at this time, or whether the developers feel they are doing very well, but the consumers are not feeling as good about it, whether there is trust in the data in this thing. So there's a whole measure that we had, this whole spider chart that you see on there, that we kind of could create. And that suddenly made the whole change process something that you don't have to talk in terms of feelings, but you can start talking in terms of numbers. I mean, there's a huge qualitative part to this. And that started, I think it's an attempt to start thinking about bringing in frameworks in change, a process, especially when you are driving algorithms and data at the core of the business in very different ways. So that's essentially, we took the data management and kind of AI principles with the change management frameworks, and we kind of rolled this out. And they're seeing some good success. But this notion around how do you measure change and how do you make it in a structure, and how do you put structure around it, I think is going to be a very important topic as we go along, and as some of these digital transformations start going into the next stage of embed in an organization. Related to change, the other big factor is data literacy. And the data literacy aspect of it, and if you really think about if most of the chief analytics officers that I kind of work with, this is our number one topic we talk about, right? And I know Shubro later in the day is going to talk about something that we are doing on our side. So obviously as an enterprise, what we are doing on that front, some really fascinating stuff. But this is whether it's a state department, whether we are talking to a healthcare payer, or we are talking to a chemicals company, across the board, the bigger issue, there's a great example that one of my clients who moved from a financial services institution to a luxury beauty products institution, and he says, I used to work in an organization which used to think in numbers. Now I'm working in an organization that thinks in colors. How do I drive that? And they started driving that change top down. They kind of created this whole art of inquiry as an executive learning package from the board down. And they kind of took through them. There are many attempts. And then on the bottom up, there's all kinds of activities. I know a big European bank, they essentially are creating their own university, a university to train everyone. This is examples of State Department. They are trying to do things, and the US State Department is trying to do things in the government space. I mean, if you think about intelligence, and you think about that entire intelligence life cycle and process is completely data-driven right now. So how do you actually manage that? So they have to think about data literacy in a very big way. So the point is, this is an area that I think continues to evolve, where how do you try to think about whether you call it data literacy, or some other term, fancy term for it, it's going to become more and more important. And that's something that we, as professionals, have to influence the rest of the organization to go and drive. I said, listen to what Shubhra has to say. It's a fascinating case study. And then finally, the dark side of it, I think, which was there, which is how do you automate trust? Because when algorithms take over, bad things also happen. The point, if I go back to your my trading example, I stopped in 2012 at 50% because the reality is the trading from last 6 or 7 years at least has not gone beyond 60%, the high-frequency trading. And the reason it has not gone before more than that is because there are more regulations that are coming in. There's this example here in 2012 where Knight Capital, which is one of the largest HFTs companies out there, they upgraded to a new system and did wrong trades worth of $7 billion and lost $500 million in a day. And they got shut down, literally shut down in a year after that. And these things happen, and there are probably like 15 other examples that you will see happening either from a business perspective, from ethical perspectives. There's a whole debate about social media platforms and the role there. But the broader point is this space will be regulated. This space will be way more regulated than it is today. That's just, it's a matter of when, not if. Some industries like healthcare, financial services already are, and I think it's coming to others too, in different phases and different times. So as a community, we need to start thinking about the trust aspect of it, and I think we are. I mean, if you go and think about I know August is speaking about in the third day keynote about this topic, but this notion around managing trust and automating some of that, frameworks for responsible AI, explainable, ethical, and responsible, how do you actually bring it all together? It's a topic that is going to become much more relevant as we speak, and it's it's going to become real. I think by and large, there are some interesting experiments going on in this space, apart from completely regulated places, and I think it has to become a lot more at the center of things. So as you embed, again, thinking about literacy, thinking about how do you automate trust, thinking about responsible AI, and how you actually think about the whole notion around change. That's going to go and drive that. So while all of this thing is happening, what we are talking about is technology that already exists, but the technology doesn't stop. What's really interesting and what's really cool is there's some really fascinating developments that are happening today as we speak, or happening, at least the OpenAI project happening for the last few years, and it has become public release of newer approaches. And those newer approaches, like DALL-E, I know how many of you have played around with DALL-E? I know there was a mention about this art. Some of you have played around with DALL-E or some versions of DALL-E, which is, I mean, you would think about AI is all about numbers and logic and decisions. This is essentially AI getting into the heart of creativity, right? In the Colorado State Fair last year, or Fine Arts State Fair, one of the entries, and they didn't know that, one of the entries was a person who essentially gave a lot of keywords to this DALL-E system and created an image, and that won the first prize. And then won the first prize, and then there was a whole lot of furor over, like, is this the right thing? Is it ethical? Should AI be doing art? There was a art auction of an AI, which I think by Sotheby's did it. They got the highest for an AI-generated art image. Probably they got for $500,000, it got sold, that painting got sold. So there's something else that's happening, which is all the things that we talked about is the things we need to worry about in enterprises, and the new future is evolving at the same time. If you would see, I don't know if you have seen DALL-E, I mean, if you have not that, you can quickly say. Essentially what you do is all these images are generated by AI, and you write essentially a koala dunking a basketball. And this is a completely AI-generated image. You start essentially just write a few terms. You want to change the dog to a cat, or a cute cat. And there you go, it happens. You're thinking about onboarding, KYC onboarding problems today, think about what's going to happen tomorrow, all right? So it's really interesting around what DALL-E can do in some of that. So the other big things that we are very excited about and we track is GPT-3. It's a large language model, 175 billion points. And essentially, it's language that has evolved into now where the AI essentially, or the algorithms, can blog, they can argue with you. And what I did was, before we went into this conference, we essentially sent out this to our team, helped me do that, where we asked GPT-3, hey, Cypher is India's biggest AI conference. It'll highlight new innovations and wave of change. I'm speaking as the keynote of the conference. What should I present? And the green is what GPT-3 told us, or recommended me, that you should focus on innovation in AI, you should balance your presentation with discussion of potential risks, your presentation should be structured to capture attention of the audience, excite them about the topic. Some suggestions for doing this is starting off with an interesting story or a statistic, use strong visuals, provide concrete examples. The audience should leave your presentation feeling like they have learned something new and valuable. So hopefully I lived up to GPT-3's expectations. Thank you.